Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CDH. I am Reed, aka Sick Robot, and today I'm joined by Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going, everyone?
And in this episode, we're going to be covering the best card in the format. But actually,
it's not a question, it's a statement. The best card in the format.
What? No. It's the reading out of the clickbait in the title.
Anyway. It's incredulous, question mark, exclamation point, exclamation
exactly.
point,
There we go. You got there.
1-1 exclamation point.
But we're going to be doing like as nuanced a discussion as is possible. What the fuck? Anyway, whatever. So we'll get into that in a bit. But before that, we have some stuff to talk about, namely Vintage Cube.
Yeah,
Rip Cube for this season.
It just ended, so now we can get back to recording.
Yeah, and get back to like my life in general aside from Vintage Cube. I don't know what happened this season. I don't usually get this sucked into Vintage Cube, but I played a lot. I think I actually
played a lot less than I normally do. But
just you know what? Good for you, because yeah, I definitely didn't. I think I played 40 leagues of Vintage Cube this season.
It's pretty good.
Or like 40 drafts. I ended up with 13 trophies, so it's like a 1/3 trophy rate, which I'm pretty happy with. I didn't even go into it with the intention of tracking, but I'm down.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid result.
What's actually, because this is like the one time we're gonna get to talk about this. What's your favorite draft this season for yourself?
Man, I had a lot of fun with the sacrifice archetype.
Dude, Red Black was so fun this season. Oh my god, it's hilarious how the last few seasons there's been a goblin bombardment in the cube, and it's just been a meme to pick it every time, and then this time around it's actually an incredible amount of fun, and you can actually do decently well with it.
Jadar is a card that really impressed me. I was it's just kind of an infinite 2/2, but oh man, you put a skull clamp on that, you get even with something like a Mayhem Devil or a Goblin Bombardment, just a 2/2 and a ping. It was it was nasty in a lot of decks.
The fact that it also gives you sacks versus an Ophiomancer doesn't give you Mayhem Devil triggers on its own.
Yeah.
But Jadar does. And also it just clocks people, right? It's a 2-mana 3/3 effectively, or what, a 2-mana 3x. So if people don't have blockers, you just clock them as well with it, which is not that bad.
I mean, obviously, if they can find blockers for a 1/1, then
then it gets much worse. But
yeah, it's a fun one.
I think my favorite was either the hyper broken blue-green deck that I drafted, or I drafted a black the black-green combo ball deck as well, that I didn't end up trophying with, but it was a very fun one with Primeval Titan, Dark Depths, Urza Saga, Tolarian Academy, Thespian Stage, Strip Mine, and then there's a Crucible and a Excavator in there as well with crop rotation and just all this fun stuff. Vampire Hexmage.
I did have fun. I beat the perfect Tinker deck. It was
nice.
Oh my god, it was so not okay. It was yeah, so I'm in the O2 bracket, so I'm already mad, right? And then my opponent goes, Workshop, Chromux, Coercive Portal on the play. I'm just fantastic.
Yeah,
awesome.
just great.
And then
super
Strip Mines my turn 1 land. And I was oh my god. So yeah, it was Academy shops, a good amount of mana rocks, Tinker, Upheaval, yeah, just the whole, the portal, metamorph, just all the really good cards to have in that deck. I don't know how much they had by way of power. Maybe that was the one thing they didn't have. But
yeah, but they had all the interlocking pieces required for the deck.
Just the whole.
Yeah,
deck. I was okay.
I played against the I think I posted this in the Cube channel, but the I played against a deck in the 0-1 bracket that was like Sans White Tinker. And I in the 0-1 bracket game one, I see 2 Moxen, a Mana Vault, a Tinker, an Ancestral Recall, and then the full twin combo. And I was just like, what is this bullshit? What am I supposed to be doing here? How did you lose?
Yeah, it's
Anyway,
really wild
good
to
stuff.
see some of the decks that people
like
that you get
managed
in
to
like the
lose a
0-1
match with.
bracket.
Yeah.
You're just like, how did you get
Yeah.
here?
I was the cube actually so they switched curators this season from Carmen Handy to, I forget who it is, but it is someone who was around for like the initial curation of Vintage Cube and is back to it after like a few years at this point, which is really cool. And I liked a lot of the swaps. Like they sort of did like an initial swap set, and then like because of some bugs and some like bug cards and interactions and stuff, they did some swaps later on, and then did like a full set of like secondary swaps like halfway through the season. And I was like a pretty big fan all said and done after they like had made all of them. Because there was like some pretty egregious errors on the first one, or like some pretty egregious swaps for the first set, but it was like mostly fixed by the end.
Yeah, there's still a couple things that I'm like shocked they took out. And there's a couple things that I'm like really annoyed they didn't put in that like explicitly
that like are
fit.
like
They're like, we
super,
wanted to make this an archetype, and we cut this awesome card for it, or like, and we didn't put in like the most obvious card to enable this archetype, and I'm like, that's an interesting choice.
Yeah, that's a decision. They also they did do some experimentation with some like role players and some archetypes as well, which I was sort of nice. I'm a huge fan of the Orcish Lumberjack. Like the red green deck loves that card. Like you're a lot of the time the Applejack's deck is just like you're just like playing monoliths and like ancient tombs and stuff anyway. So like having the dork for the archetype is like it's sort of like signposting really great. I think it's awesome. Well, mostly just for turn 2 Minsc and Booze because like that's sort of what you're just doing in that deck. But I think it's great for that archetype. And then also, huge, massive fan of the Atraxa over the Progenitus. Oh my god, the Atraxa is so much better.
I feel like I still would have liked the Progenitus. I do like the Atraxa, maybe just over like a different reanimation. Like maybe over the Ashen Rider.
Yeah. Oh, dude, Ashen Rider's so good though. It's like
is it though?
It problems
like I
so
feel
well.
like it's just like the
but it's also like
home,
it's
you know
it's also it's a role player in the sneak attack decks as well though, right? Especially because like exiles.
It's just the Archon we have at home.
Yeah. I will say though, rip fucking what's it called? Rip Tar Pit. Oh my god, that one was egregious. I sort of get like dropping some of the other main lands, but dropping Tar Pit sucked.
I feel like
because that was a primary win condition for the blue-black control decks.
I feel like that the era where that is true is over. Like even when it was still in, I was not drafting Tar Pit highly. Like it's so not Colonnade.
I think it very much is. I think like the ability to clear walkers basically for free.
I mean, I guess it helps that they put
very
Thief of Sanity back in for that deck, but
yeah, and the ninja.
The ninja's whatever.
The Fallen Shinobi. you say the ninja's whatever. I love Fallen Shinobi.
Oh, I like it. I don't think it like. I don't think it's like a plan or like as consistent a plan as the thing. Yeah. Just a lot of steps. Anyways, we should probably.
Yeah, I was literally just about to get us out to the actual episode because there was our listeners have to understand that we have needs. we got to talk about Cube at some point.
We're
during
only
the season.
human after all.
Yeah. All right. So getting into housekeeping, we have one new patron, which is Banjo Cat. Thank you for becoming a patron. Much appreciated. And you rock. And then for new developments, if you want to catch this.
Yeah. So we Monarch has announced LotusCon is having a big CEDH tournament. It is in St. Louis St. Louis, and it is on October 7th that weekend. Hopefully, we'll be making it out with at least some of us. Obviously, it was only announced within the last week, and
we're
ways
still
off, but
figuring it out. Yeah.
hopefully we'll be there. Hopefully you guys will be there. Hopefully come say hi and hang out and do all that good stuff. More events is good.
Also, I checked the prize payouts for this one, and I'm very happy with the amount of flattening that they did while still maintaining like a Lotus for first place. It's pretty great. I think it's a Lotus for first, $1,000 for everybody in the final pod, and then like you still get like a couple hundred for making top 16, and then you get your entry back for like top 40 or something like that, or like
it's definitely
top 30, something like that. So
I'm
definitely a fan.
Definitely more of a flatter prize pool enjoyer. I've found that like obviously having the big ticket item for first place, like you then get to like put that on the poster. It's great for
like exactly.
But like in terms of the actual value that has to people attending the tournament, I think that a flatter prize structure is more likely to entice people who like want to more likely to entice people who are put off at the thought of just throwing away money.
Yeah. And like certainly for people who are like in the area but like and can like easily make it out but like might not want to just like show up to pay like $75 or whatever to like just lose that money and then go home at the end of 2 days. So yeah, definitely a fan. All right, cool. So we'll get into the main topic now. I guess I'll actually spoil it, which is that so we're going to be talking about the quote-unquote best card in the format, which is no specific card, and we're really going to be talking more about like the ways that you can evaluate cards as being the best card in the format, and how, I'm not sure that there actually is an answer right now, and there's a bunch of different opinions, and it like fully depends on like what you value as being, the best, what makes a card the best. So yeah, disclaimer before we get into any of this is that obviously you can't do any evaluation in a full vacuum. Like everything is sort of good in relation to everything else that's happening in both the deck that you're playing it in and the format that you're playing it in. So can't be super objective, but we're gonna try to like abstract back a bunch of this as much as possible and make it at least an interesting discussion. So I guess let's get started with the first category that we have here, which is I think like this is probably like the most obvious one. It also like contains probably 2 of the 3 cards that people would probably like list off the top of their heads as being the best cards in the format, which is the best win condition, because it's the thing that kills you, right?
Yeah, it certainly. Well, this is. I think we'll get into this more, but many decks are very much built around their win conditions, and so,
and
if those don't exist, then how different does the deck have to look? And if the deck looks super different, then it's a pretty good argument for the impact of that card.
And obviously, like, an abstract would be, like, obviously, like, a win condition could be a 0 mana instant with split second that says win the game.
That would be the best card in the format.
That would be the best card in the format. But, there's a range of, like, Sanguine Bond and whatever. What's the classic one? Dina came to mind, but Exquisite Blood, there we go. Dina immediately came to mind, and I was just like, wait, no, not that one. The classic. But there's a wide gap between that, like, hypothetical and, like, Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood. So, like, there's a range there. So there's definitely a lot of stuff, like, in that range that might be considered the best thing in the format right now. Like, the obvious ones currently are Thoracle and Underworld Breach. I think there's arguments for both. I think both me and Morgan are probably of the opinion that Thoracle is, like, probably the better of the two, just in terms of, like, the sort of all the factors coming together of, like, its requirements of only, like, 2 cards and 3 mana. It is a bit color heavy, but that's fine. But also it's, like, resilience to a lot of forms of interaction in general in the format.
I mean, I think certainly it's the best win condition. Obviously, like
right.
the thing about Breach is that the rest,
it
like the cards have more utility, and Breach can be used for value, and
it could be like a 1-card combo, and it can be like less mana intensive and less card intensive than Thoracle, right? It can like lead to faster wins.
Really, but I feel like it can be less mana intensive or less card intensive.
Okay, sure.
But generally not both at the same time.
Yeah, but the idea being that like it can be this like very efficient thing. But obviously more vulnerable to stuff. And like more easily interactable and more easily hateable. So trade-offs and all that stuff. And I think that like these are I would say that like there's probably the big three of what people consider to be the best card in the format at the moment, or like potentially like the most bannable card in the format, if that's also an axis, I guess. But that's sort of a separate axis, I think. Just in terms of like there's a lot of stuff that weighs into like being bannable in terms of like there's a pillarization of cards for the format, like Brainstorm is in Legacy, where like Brainstorm would probably be banned in Legacy if it was like not identified as being one of the like key cards that people want to play when playing that format, is like the classic reasoning. So most bannable
don't
doesn't
get me started on this one.
Yeah, most bannable doesn't like really equate to best card in the format, but it's like it's a reasonable like starting point to start looking at it from. So like the big three are like Thoracle, Breach, and Dockside, I would say right now is what like most people are looking at in terms of like if you ask the average CDH player what the card they think should be banned is probably going to be one of those three. And two of them are win conditions. Because
and I mean the third one is it's a part of many win conditions.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's not listed under win conditions just because I would say that's not its primary function, whereas like Thoracle and Breach are primarily win conditions.
You play those to end the game.
Whereas Dockside, like some decks use it as a win condition, but primarily it's just a big ritual.
But yeah, I mean, like I think win conditions like have a good argument to be like I feel like they're the most visibly best cards in the format, right? Because it's like, again, they're the thing that's killing you, and also it like you get to see them. Like, or rather, their power is like very visible, if that makes sense. In terms of like, if you die on turn 1 to a Breach or a Thoracle or something, it's like, wow, yeah, that killed me. Those cards are really good together. Same thing with like Flash for like Flash Hulk and stuff like that. Would have been like same thing, or I don't know, like Fast Bond, or I guess Fast Bond isn't really good, but like Time Vault would be considered like very similar. Yeah, I don't know. You have anything else to like list here aside from these two? I sort of just put a dash here because I couldn't really justify adding anything.
I think in terms of win conditions that are in contention for being in a discussion about best card in the format, it's just those two and Dockside if we were to put it in that category. But
fair.
I think all the other win conditions are like, frankly, Breach is like the only win condition that can, with any level of regularity, be better than Oracle on like basically any axis.
Yeah, like it just only does it on like specific axes at a time.
Yeah, like Oracle's so cheap that like all of the other win cons are easier to interact with. I mean, I guess unless you're just assuming, obviously, like when you cast Tainted Pact or Demonic Consultation, those are instants which a lot more counter spells hit. But pretty much anything that isn't hit by anything that's only hit by narrow counter spells is going to be hit by removal, other than like, I guess, Sacred Guide Oracle.
Which is that has its own issues.
So like they're generally easier to interact, more mana, require more deck slots. Like Oracle is just such an unreasonable win condition.
It is it's you sort of forget because it's just like a staple of the format now, where like you just like are going to see it a lot of the time, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I have like a very hardened shell to complaints about Thoracle. Like they just don't get that far with me. I'm just like, yeah, it's just it exists as a part of the format. And like we'd have like abstract discussions about how unhealthy it is, but like in my day to day, like I'm not gonna like engage with people that are complaining about Thoracle. But you take a step back, it's like, yeah, this is like super unreasonably the best thing to be doing to win the game in a vast majority of situations and decks and like archetypes and such. Which I guess like might be also like an axis to evaluate the like best cards as win conditions on, is like the applicability of like how many slots do they take up, how many like different styles of decks can you play them in. Which I think Thoracle like just beats out Breach, but like it's pretty close.
Well, like certainly there are lots of red decks that don't necessarily want Breach, and
okay, how many good red decks are there that don't want Breach is the question, I guess. Because like that boils down to like exactly stacks, right?
Sure. So I mean, unless your take is just like stacks is bad, then
which I wouldn't boil it down that far, but I think the selection of good stacks is certainly like smaller than the selection of decks that like red decks that just like want to play Breach.
Sure, yeah,
but
like,
yeah,
Breach is like a powerful enough card that if you're not like pretty actively working against it with your game plan, you do want to play it. I'm not denying that. I just like I think it's much harder to justify not playing Oracle Consult in like a deck that can play Oracle Consult
blue blacks,
because there's just so much less that gets in the way of it. Right, like a deck like Winota is playing like I don't know, so probably 7 or 8 cards that make it really obnoxious to win with Breach.
Yeah, probably more honestly, but yeah.
I guess it depends on if you count like, or how hard you count like
Thalias and stuff. Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, it's playing like many cards that make it obnoxious to win with Breach, whereas like almost no blue-black decks are playing many cards that make it obnoxious to win with Thoracle because there just aren't that many, and it's basically like rule of laws and ETB hate.
Yeah.
And those are just like not that common. Admittedly,
not
in
that
part,
good
they're not that common in
blue-black. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so I would say in this category I'd probably place Thoracle there just because of the again the holistic view of it, of like Thoracle's power is like very flat. Like Breaches is sort of like I gotta like keep shoehorning this analogy in like every time I could possibly do it, I guess. But like Thoracle's power grading is like very flat, and like Breaches is a bit spikier, where like it can be good at a lot of things, but it's sort of situational and is like a bit more interactable, bit more like vulnerable. So I would probably place Thoracle above Breach here, but again, very close. The next category that we have here is I would say is like probably the next most common style of card that you would probably get like responses for, like what do you think should be banned, which is the best card to have in your opening hand. These are like very obviously powerful, but I feel like they sort of get by both because of a lot of them are like spirit of the format things or just like longevity things at this point because they've just been around forever, and then also like the power is a lot more invisible, right? Like it's like one of the ones that we have here is like Mana Crypt, and there's like it makes it harder to evaluate Crypt as like the best card in the format when sometimes people will like turn one go like, oh, like land drop Crypt like Tritosphere or something. They're like, wow, Tritosphere is like so fucking good. And it's just like, no, the Crypt is really good. It just sort of doesn't really matter what you're doing after the Crypt because it's like so good.
Yeah, I think Crypt probably leads to the highest proportion of like quote unquote non-games.
Yeah.
And just, completely unreasonable starts where you just never really have a chance if someone has like Crypt into good follow up on turn 1. Even like Crypt into okay follow up can be pretty
Yeah, I mean Crypt Archon is like already just like incredibly obnoxious, and a lot of decks have a hard time beating it. Yeah. And like not even just the fast turbo stuff, but just like it's just crippling to have to be under one spell a turn and be under Root Maze as well, when your opponent's just like totally fine and has all the mana.
Yep. So yeah, I think, and obviously like Soul Ring to a lesser extent, it's still insane to have the mana it gives you, and often Crypt openers involve like playing a 2-mana rock off it and not doing much else, in which case Soul Ring is still fine. But the ability, the default of having a colored mana,
is just insanely powerful.
To cast your follow up is obviously just opens up a whole range of possibilities that don't really exist with in the same way with a turn Soul Ring.
Yeah, or even like turn 1 Mana Vault, which like again, Mana Vault same initial mana profit as Crypt, but like is expendable and doesn't give you the colored mana as well. So the other ones in here, like I think like Crypt sort of stands out here as like the sort of just the fast mana piece here, or like the generic fast mana piece, because I don't like you don't get better than Crypt with like basically any fast mana in the format at all. Crypt is just like better basically all the time, I think. Or like much better on average at least.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd say like the other two in this category that would probably resonate with people the most are Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora. Those ones are also like just like if you're evaluating cards on like how what's the card that would be the absolute best to just have in your opening hand every game, I think like Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study have like decent arguments for that spot of just being like some of the best stuff in the format to just have going on. I think unfortunately though, like a lot of the power of Rhystic Study does come along with the fast mana, so I mean I guess we can talk about that in a bit. Like
I think
aspect of it, but
a turn 3 Rhystic Study is definitely not like in contention for one of the best things to be doing. But yeah, it is interesting. I've certainly heard a lot of like discussions from, I would say, people who play a lot of turbo, or at least who play a lot of like Breach, Consult, Naz, Shells, sort of saying like actually the best thing to be doing is just trying to jam like a Rhystic Study or a Mystic Remora super early.
Just like some card engine,
As the typical turbo plan is something people are increasingly ready for.
Yeah, which I mean makes sense. I think probably like I think these cards, which is a hilarious thing to say because I think like we've both been a part of the community for long enough that like you obviously remember like like Don't Feed the Fish has been a meme for like much longer than either of us have been involved in the community. Like it's just a true classic, and even with that being the case, I feel like the power level of these cards has gone underappreciated until like relatively recently. I'd say like past, like I wouldn't say like past year or whatever, but like past couple of years, it really has felt like it's like, oh yeah, these cards are like actually like ridiculous a lot of the time.
I mean, I think when I like started really getting involved in the community, I don't think Rhystic Study was like an auto include.
Yeah, Rhystic Study was not an auto include. There were a lot of blue decks that just like weren't playing Study.
It was like worse against the types of decks that
stuff,
were popular at the time. Well, just like particularly like Thrasios Tymna midrange is, unless you're landing the Rhystic Study super early, like, I just play games and like, we've seen this several times where like, I wind up just paying 10, 12 mana for Rhystic Study triggers over the course of a game. And that's like fine in the sort of game that those decks wanted to be playing. And like, I've certainly seen people who kept a Rhystic Study as like a plan. It's like, oh, my hand has nothing, but I have this early Rhystic Study, and then everyone went, cool, we'll just pay for that, and then
just pay for
it.
Yep.
It's like they're 5 turns in, and they've drawn like 2 cards, and they're like, wait, what?
This wasn't supposed to happen.
I love my delayed action divination.
Yeah. But yeah, I think like I think they do have arguments for being like some of the best stuff to have going on. I think like if you were to have a card in your hand in your opening hand like every game and try to take it as much in a vacuum as possible, Ristic Study is Mystic Remora is probably the better one, just in terms of like you're almost like if in the right pods and right situations you're like always getting cards off of it, whereas like Rustic Study, yeah, like we just said, it's sort of like it's not the most reliable engine, especially the later it comes down. Like Remora is almost always going to be like good, even if you like don't play turn 1 and then you play like turn 4 or whatever. Like you're usually still going to be drawing cards off of it at a fairly good rate.
Yeah, because like it's not really practical for people to pay for Remora in the way that a Ristic Study that's too late, they definitely can.
It also just like sticks around for like as long as Ristic Study functionally in the later portions of the game, right? Like
yeah, when you drop a Remora on like turn 4 and you have 6 mana, like, that Remora is gonna be you're paying for it until the end of the game almost always, unless you really brick on mana or have something super mana intensive to be doing.
Yeah, I need to make this win attempt with 3 pieces of backup and a Grand Abolisher. Like, okay, bye Remora. we'll do this later. And then I put one here as well in this category because I think it is. I think it deserves to be mentioned in like cards to have in your opening hand, although like certainly deck dependent, which is Jeweled Lotus. Jeweled Lotus is like I think the one piece of fast mana in the format that can rival Crypt a lot of the time, depending on what you're doing with it.
I think the problem is that in order for what you're doing with it to rival Crypt, you have to be playing a deck that's bad when you don't have one of those.
That's fair.
Like, yeah, turn 1 Grand Arbiter, kind of really dumb, but you're playing Grand Arbiter.
That's fair. I mean, yeah. There is some like really busted stuff to be doing with it that like isn't good decks. Like a turn 1 Tevesh is pretty great and like tends to be pretty backbreaking a lot of the time, although like not as interactive as a Grand Arbiter. But like yeah, I maybe we haven't even seen necessarily the cap of how good Jeweled Lotus can be in terms of like commanders being printed. Like that's a pretty cursed sentence to say, but you know, like I think maybe if it's not now, I think it certainly is like one of the few cards in the format that has the potential to be there.
I certainly think that like given that Tevesh can't even be cast turn 1 off a land and a Jeweled Lotus, like trying to evaluate that impact compared to something like a turn 1 like Ristic Study,
Crypt, sure. Or yeah, okay.
Like turn 1 Crypt Ristic Study is like way better than turn 1 Tevesh, and Jeweled Lotus doesn't even get you to turn 1 Tevesh on its own.
Right. Fair. Yeah, it makes sense. Just wanted to throw that one out there. Do you have anything else for any other contenders for best card in the opening hand? I mean, obviously Dockside fits in this one as well, but we have Dockside in different categories still, so hold your horses, listeners.
I guess not really. Like, obviously, I have a bunch of ideas, but they're all generally like relatively meta dependent.
Right.
There's
what do you think? Like yeah.
Well, like obviously, like Carpet is one that can have an incredibly high floor.
Sure, ceiling. Yeah.
And like in
high ceiling, but yeah.
Sorry, yeah. They can have like a super high ceiling. Very low floor. The floor is it does nothing.
Well, but, no, hold up. The floor is that you don't have to play against a blue deck in the pod, which is also very nice.
Yeah. But yeah, obviously can have a very high ceiling, but it's much less sort of consistently incredible. And then like sometimes, I mean, Draneth is like one that I have certainly like, if you can get Draneth down before anyone plays their commander, oftentimes that is incredibly strong.
It is just like
it does
a lot of the
again
time,
depend a bit on the commanders you're playing against, where like some decks don't really care about their commanders or have like a reasonable game plan that they're probably going for, or like are just going to get their commanders down. Like the odds that you can stop Rograk from landing with
Yeah.
Dranith it can happen, but it's very low. And like to a lesser extent, Lavinia can be in that category of like turn 1 Lavinia on the play is just, you know, a good middle finger.
I mean, if you could guarantee having a Root Maze in your opening hand every game, I feel like that would be like pretty great as well.
The problem is that it's hard to like play turn 1. I feel like.
Really? I don't know. Like, if you build a deck under the idea that you're always gonna have a turn 1 Root Maze, like I feel like a lot of the awkwardness from
or like
Root
it's hard to play turn 1
like,
when you're like later in the turn order.
Sure.
Because like if anyone does anything, then your Root Maze looks real silly.
Yep.
But yeah, I wouldn't put any of those quite on the same power level. I think Dranith is probably the closest in terms of.
I think
like it has much closer to the consistency of something like a Mana Crypt than the other cards I named.
Yeah. I think an interesting one to think about as well here that I just came to me is that like potentially just like always having a Vamp Tutor in your opening hand could be like pretty good. Obviously, like, you would take a Crypt over having a Vamp in your opening hand, like, a vast majority of the time, I think. But, like, always having the ability to go get whatever you need out of your deck for 1 mana seems, like, pretty good to me.
Yeah.
And
certainly
I think there's
the flexibility of, like, just passing turn 1, holding the mana, and then vamping is...
Exactly. And you just always having a tutor in your opening hand would be, like, a pretty great thing to have going on there. Like less on a raw power level, but like, you know, you can adapt more to what the rest of the table's doing. But yeah, I'd say
it could be
probably
misstepped.
Yeah, it's the truth suck. That's why Remore is worse than Study, right?
It's also why Soul Ring's worse than Mana Crypt.
Yeah, true. What are they printing? Like a Nyx
step? What if Misstep could also just counter 0 cost spells?
Yeah, mental Nyx step.
No, not spells where no mana was spent to cast them. 0 CMC.
0 CMC.
Like obviously counter.
Very
like,
important distinction.
Nyx plus mental misstep on 1 card would be insane, but like just countering 0 drops, I actually feel like is only. Like, it feels like a very fair thing.
Well, okay.
Like, 0 drops are just unfair, right? Like, there are 0 fair 0 drops.
Yes. Chalice the Void. But...
That's not a fair card.
Here's the question. How much would Nyx staple to Mental Misstep have to cost, to be fair?
What do you mean?
Or to be, like, not broken. Like, you staple... Like, you put a Nyx and a Mental Misstep, so you can counter anything that either 1 mana or 0 mana was spent to cast. How much does this have to cost? Is it just a blue?
I think it could just be a blue.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have to be like a
that's
Phyrexian.
Like way too good for. It's like way too good for Legacy, I think. But for in terms of CDH, I think it's like I think it would be a very good card at blue. But
I guess maybe you just have to make it. Well, no, because it costs blue, so it avoids the mental misstep problem of like people play misstep to counter other people's misstep.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, like minor misstep is not, I don't think, a good card. Obviously, it doesn't hit.
That's fair.
Like Force of Will.
Force of Will, which is the big one, right? Like Force Swat, Rollick, etc.
Well, I mean, you were saying Legacy. You don't have to worry about those in Legacy.
Oh, sure. Yeah, fair.
I think it would be very strong at 1, but I don't think it would be a problem.
Sure. Just wanted to get a quiz in there real quick. Anyway, yeah, I would say Crypt is probably top of the pile in terms of this category. In my personal opinion, just the mana is just too good, too flexible. So this is what I was sort of the next category here is like this is a loose one for me, but it was sort of what we were talking about earlier with the Ristic Study problem of like it matters if you can get it down soon enough, but it like very rapidly drops off if you if you have a Ristic Study in your opening hand and you're only casting it turn 3, turn 4, it's a lot worse. So sort of what I wanted to talk about in this category was enablers versus payoffs, because it is like a real discussion to be had of like do you evaluate the things that make the broken stuff possible but aren't really the things that actually make broken things happen, if that makes sense? So like a crypt is an enabler. A mana crypt doesn't do anything on its own, but it lets you do like broken stuff as soon as you have like other spells to cast, because you just get to do stuff ahead of the curve. And like obviously the things that you have to be doing off of the crypt have to be like above a certain level of brokenness, because if you're casting 3 mana 2/2s off of a mana crypt, well, like a lot of the time you can just get like clocked for that if you don't have like good follow-ups.
Black Lotus Grey Ogre.
Hell yeah. And then yeah, like obviously like payoffs are things that do broken stuff, but like again, like talking about Rhystic Study, a lot of the time there are really good payoffs that are broken in the context of a format that like aren't necessarily that good without their enablers or taken outside the context of that format. So like Blood Moon, very powerful card in Legacy, but it's a powerful card in Legacy because you can cast it on turn 1 with some degree of consistency, and the rest of the decks in the format are all like 4 and 3 color for the most part.
All right, Reed, I think you've buttered everyone up. You're just gonna have to rip the Band-Aid off and say what you're thinking.
So I think that fetch lands have an argument to be called some of the best stuff in the format. I've had this opinion for a long time.
We interrupt Into the North to bring to you. Reed rants about fetch lands for the 5th time.
I've had this opinion for a long time. I think fetch lands are like just way too good for the format, and obviously like I think they're way too good for like I think they've eternally ruined Eternal formats just because like they're way too much fun to play with, and you get an entire like sect of people addicted to playing with fetch lands once they're legal in a format for any period of time, because everybody likes having perfect mana all the time, and having like additional stuff to be doing in your mana base is really fun when it's on your side of the table, and it's like sort of hard to notice it happening when it's on the other side of the table, because it's just like, oh yeah, just like we're all playing with perfect mana, this is great. I don't think that's super healthy for CDH. I think that like I think fetch lands do a the largest amount of pull for like actually letting people be able to cast their spells for 5 color and like greedy mana bases, and like cast like a bunch of double pipped stuff all in a row. I think fetch lands, sort of grouping them all together, obviously, because you know they're the fetches. They're sort of one card basically. I think there is an argument to call fetches like maybe not the best card in the format, but like I think it's up there. I think they're up there.
We get it. You hate fetches.
Anyway,
I don't endorse this take.
I think there is a discussion to be had though about like people's personal values of what they value as like being the good card, and obviously like there can be bleed over. You don't have to like lock yourself into just only being like, yeah, I think the enablers are the things that are the best cards in the format, or I think the payoffs are the best things like in the format. But you know, I think people have different values in terms of if they think the enablers are like obviously the best things to be doing and like potentially the things they want to ban, or if like the payoffs are the things that like they think are the absolute best cards and they think like might need to eat a ban or whatever. Like a classic example of this is the Pauper format, right, where like the Pauper sort of ban list has like a very like inverted way of thinking about like how you would normally ban cards, in terms of like they for the most part have like all of the enablers legal and just sort of banned all the payoffs, where that's not necessarily the case in pretty much every other format. And it works pretty well there. They have like broken formats every once in a while in Pauper, but you know, it's relatively healthy for the most part. So I think there's a discussion to be had there, and I think it's sort of interesting.
Okay.
Thoughts?
I don't think I'm getting on board this train. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. All right.
I think like in terms of the enablers, first of all, like we have mana rocks that fix incredibly well. We have rainbow lands. Like obviously they help. I'm not like it'd be stupid to say that they don't, but I think...
sure. If we're talking about fetches, sure, I understand. I was more just like if you had things to talk about in terms of enablers versus payoffs, and like which one of those you categorize as like being the best cards in general. I understand if you don't want to talk fetches.
Okay, I guess on that front, I think that they've done I think that the enablers, I think the payoffs are sort of have the potential to be the better cards, but they like sort of realized early on that that was true, that like a card that actually just wins the game really easily is a dangerous card to print.
Right.
And very early on they made a lot of mistakes with cards that let you like get too many resources too quickly, but don't themselves actually present a threat to opponents, right? Like if we look at the Power 9, they're all
it's all
enablers.
Things that don't actually end the game.
Yeah, they don't do anything on their own. Like it's just
I mean, if you have a deck full of Ancestral Recalls and Black Lotuses, that will kill an opponent, but anyway.
Will it?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure somebody did the math, and you do like a 2/3 split of Lotuses and Recalls, and you like draw your deck and then deck your opponent.
I guess.
Anyway,
I guess it would
not
kill.
Yeah. Not what we're talking about.
Wouldn't you want 3? You'd want 3 recalls per Lotus, right? But anyways,
yeah.
Maybe like a few more Lotuses.
It's better to have excess Lotuses though, just so you like don't fizzle.
Do like 17 and 43 or something. Anyways.
Yeah, I didn't mean to get us off on this.
Sure, they don't like really do anything on their own, and like they made a huge number of mistakes like that, and like they haven't printed. I mean, like I think Oracle was like the biggest mistake. Oracle and Breach are like some of the biggest mistakes that they've printed, but even they have like
design history. Yeah.
They're kind of only mistakes because of a context that like there are these other cards that enable them super well that they didn't really think about. So like, yeah, I fall on the side of I think they've made more mistakes with enablers, but I think payoffs in theory have like the higher seal.
Right. Especially if they're still good at their rate of just being cast. Because, like, I think a lot of the payoffs in CDH are, like, great payoffs under the context of being able to cast them ahead of time, and also under the context of, like, having a bunch of stuff in your deck that works well with them, or, like, other contexts. But I think there are definitely payoffs that are just, like, good on their own, and good, like, on curve. You don't need to, like, accelerate into them for them to be great. Maybe not so much in CDH, but like, you know, stuff like Oko doesn't need an enabler. It's just a payoff that kills people.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Do you want to get the first part of the next one?
Yeah, so the next one is you know, a way you could sort of think about like what's the best card in a format is like what's the most centralizing card. So what are the cards that are doing, you know, are doing the most in like shaping how the format is played, or the ones that are, you know, these are going to be things that you're like most often tutoring for or building your decks around, or that are having that justify the most influence on deck building, would be contenders for the best card. So we have a few here. The first one is Tymna. Reed, I
Turns
know.
out four colors for free, and just having a triple Phyrexian Arena in the command zone is pretty good. I think this one's less about like building a deck around Tymna, because building around Tymna doesn't really have to happen for it to be good. You just like play some good creatures, because there are good creatures in every color. Like there's some number of good playable creatures in like every color combination, and then
especially the ones that include white black by default.
Yeah. And then you also just like, you know, get to play 4 colors, which, you know, 5 colors is obviously the gold standard, but if I can have 4 of the colors and also have a commander that is just fucking stupid, then I'm gonna do that a large percentage of the time. I think personally, like my pick for best commander in the format by far is Tymna. I've had this opinion as well for a fairly long time. I think Tymna just like does way too much, and I mean a lot of the power level is invisible, but you play with people who are getting to CDH a couple of times, and I feel like people tend to notice relatively quickly that like they play these games where like there's some interaction, and I guess we're all just grinding now, and they look over and the different players sitting there with 8 cards in hand, and they're like, how? Well, I have 2 cards in hand. Why do you get to have all of them? And Tim was like, well, see, I'm playing a commander.
I feel like people don't notice until they either play Tymna themselves or make a point of asking how many cards people have in hand.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's so quiet. You're just like, oh, Tymna trigger? People are like, oh, yeah, whatever. And then, that happened so many times where, like, I got 2 cards, I got 3 cards. Oh, I have 6, and you're like, wait.
Like, wait, what?
Like, you have, like,
you went 1 for 1 with everybody else. Like, we all interacted this game. What's happening?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, like, a really good illustration of this was before Commander Legends, people built 3-color decks with Tymna. Like, they had another 2-color partner that overlapped one with Tymna, and of like all of the white black X color combinations, they were just like there was like Zur and then Tymna decks, and like no other partner has like had that, and Tymna was pushing out like basically most of the commander options in those 3-color combinations.
Just anything that was in black white X was
even like theoretically giving up 25% of the power of Tymna, in that you're giving up one of your 4 colors for no reason. It was still good enough to like push out actual 3-color commanders.
Yeah. And honestly, I think you talked to Zur, I think a lot of people at the time would probably still have considered Tymna Ishai to be better than Zur.
What about Tymna Silas?
Yeah. Anyway, that's my I'm not going to subject our viewers to a Tymna rant every episode, but I'll
just most episodes
over the course of the year. Yeah, just most of them.
We do have a brand to uphold. Like, our logo is white and black.
My personal brand is hating Tymna. Well, maybe not hating Tymna, just I would say evaluating Tymna correctly. Yeah, there's a
you love and hate Tymna the way Lyndon loves and hates Golos.
Yeah. And then we actually get to talk about the card that we've been sort of talking about for the entire podcast. I think you probably have more to say on Dockside.
Do I? Okay. Sure. Yeah, Dockside, I think, is this is a card that plays very differently in a lot of different games and makes it kind of hard to evaluate, but it's very rare that we've seen something like win cons that rely on your opponents doing things are incredibly risky to play in this format with the huge amount of variance. And the fact that Dockside based win cons are still widely viable is like a huge testament to just how insane this card is, how easily it can go infinite, how like effective it is to be playing it even when it's not. Like, we play in probably one of the most Dockside hostile metas anywhere, and like it's still an insane card in most games. Obviously sometimes there is, like, if there's a collector who can play, then I guess it's not an insane card.
We've definitely played games as well where there's like no oof, and then somebody casts a Dockside on turn 5 or whatever, and it's just like, yeah, Dockside counts 3. You cast a Paretic Ritual.
Well, but like that's still way better than a Paretic Ritual.
It's still way better than a Paretic Ritual, though. Yes.
Yeah. So like, I'm not saying it's perfect every game, but like, even with like the grindiest, greenest meta you can think of, Dockside is still a very strong card, even in that meta. And for a card that relies on your opponents doing something to make it good, I think that's, like, kind of speaks volumes. Because if you think about, like, all of the other, like, I talked about Carpet, and I was like, yeah, well, sometimes there just, like, aren't islands, or there's, like, 1-2 islands, and it's, like, it's good, but it's not great. whereas like Dockside, I feel like the inflection point is like so low, right? It's like a Dockside that makes 4 treasures is like they couldn't just print a 2-mana card that made 4 treasures. Like that would be absurd. Just like a 2-mana sorcerer that made 4 treasures would be like the dumbest card ever.
Yeah.
Not the dumbest card ever, but they would never print that card.
It would be, it would, like, that's getting to the level of...
And that's, like, such a low bar to clear.
Area. And it's, like, that's just, like, so much of what Dockside is every time.
And that's, like, not even getting into when it makes, like, 12 treasures and actually just, like, lets you completely go off from, like, what appeared to be a non-threatening position.
Yeah. You have like 3 cards in hand, and it's like, okay, I'll cast this Dockside, and then I'll just do whatever the fuck I want for the next
I'll cast Cure. You're countering
minutes.
it? I'll respond with this ad nauseam.
Like, yeah. I think Dockside is probably I think Dockside probably out of like any of the cards on this list right now, I would say probably has an argument for like best thing in the format. Sort of irrespective of any of these categories or any sort of evaluations of it, just because of the context of like just decks play a lot of artifacts and enchantments. Like obviously there are theoretical situations where Dockside is like not a good card, but it just isn't in any of those situations so much of the time.
Yeah, I think it's like at the inflection point of like it can be the best win condition, or like it can be a contender for the best win condition, or at least like a very strong win condition, while also being an incredibly powerful card in many other contexts that basically no other card on this list really has. Like Breach is the closest, but like Value Breach is like obviously Value Breach is good, but it's not like a particularly common thing, and like very few decks are playing Breach with the expectation that they're just going to be doing it for value with any regularity.
Yeah. And the last one on the list is good old classic Ad Nauseam. It's this one's been known for a long ass time.
2018.
Ad Naus is a very good card. It I don't know what there is to say about it. I feel like all of the possible discussion that has ever had or ever could be had about Ad Nauseam has already been had. it's Ad Naus. you build your deck around it to like a modicum of a degree. Don't play things that actively stop you from storming off, and then you play an Ad Nauseam and usually win.
Well, so here, if an 8-mana sorcery that wins the game is ban-worthy, then a 5-mana instant that wins the game.
Yeah. It's just, I think Ad Naus probably is the most centralizing card on this list. It's probably, like, the highest generic... It's probably, like, the highest generic power level card that is also like very centralizing in the format, just because like you do have to build around it to a degree for the most part, but it is also just like an incredible payoff for what you get.
And like admittedly, I think as more enablers have been printed into the format, I wouldn't say the amount you have to build around it has decreased, but the amount you have to not build around it, or the amount you have to the amount you have to not build around it has like decreased, I guess. You just where like
the average deck is just a better Naus deck these days, even if it's not on Naus.
Like it used to be that like people worked really hard to get their average CMCs down. When Farm came out, it was like
High Tide
1.6 whatever, so that we can Naus, like, instead of only seeing like 20 cards, we'll see like 26, and hopefully that can find us the fast mana to win same turn, where now it's like, yeah, whatever, I'll just see 20 cards and then I'll find some way to get like Dockside and then I'll just go from there. So you like the avoidance of putting like chonkier stuff in your Naus decks has definitely like hugely decreased with time.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've always played Protean Hulk my Nas decks.
I mean,
yeah.
Okay, you played Nas in your Protean Hulk deck. Let's get one thing straight.
Yeah, I don't know. Brawls blurs that line a bit. It does not. It's very much a Hulk deck. I think there was probably a point in time where a large section of the community would have called As Nauseam the best card in the format. I'm not sure that I ever would have agreed with that. Again, like Crypt has been legal for the same amount of time that Ad Nas has been, and it is. I still think probably the better card than Nas, just because it just, the variety of things that you can do with Crypt, and it's just like always good if you're building your deck in a powerful manner. But yeah, I think Nas still is sort of holding on, although there are people that are trying to cut it now from decks because they just want to be mid-range and kill people with Dockside and Breach instead of having to tutor for a 5-minute instant, because apparently that bar is too high to cross now.
I mean, I think it does. Honestly, I feel like the problem with a lot of these decks is that they're it's almost like a mindset thing where people are locked into Ad Nauseam as like, I cast it in my main phase as a win con to win the game. And like they're playing a man deck, and that's not historically how man decks have worked. Like, I think it's entirely reasonable to build like the Nosless Timnacrum mid-range deck and then just put a Nos in it and sometimes use it to draw 10 cards in the end step and probably win the game, or like generate an insurmountable advantage. But I think people don't want to, or like don't think of the card that way. So then they like, when they draw Nas, they're like planning their game around, how can I play this Nas and then win the game? And it definitely doesn't have to be played that way.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it is effective when done so, but yeah. I think it's taken a bit, but I think we're getting back around to that. It's like I forget what year it was, but the year where Dockside was like the year that people discovered that you didn't have to do just infinite Dockside stuff. You could just like play Dockside as a really big ritual and then like flicker it once and then be off to the races or whatever. We'll get on.
Man,
like,
I'm like,
people are evaluating like other cards here with like a bit more depth, a bit more.
I feel like I'm like the flickering Dockside is like, I've never understood like the lengths people will go, except in like I would say in like exactly Corvold, where just Dockside is like
the win condition,
is basically the win condition. Like, it's such a narrow band where one Dockside is not good enough, but multiple Docksides are.
Yeah. Like,
just bouncing your own Dockside and playing it again for like 3 mana. If your Dockside made like 4 treasures, then like, ooh, that's +1 mana. If it made 5, I guess that's +2. Maybe that's decent. If it made 6, how is that not enough?
Right. Well, sometimes you need to, again, cast a Peer and then respond with a Nos.
I guess.
You're gonna get there sometimes. Yeah, I mean, those were like the main ones that we had for centralizing cards. I'm sure you could probably come up with a few more, but I don't know. Like, maybe like Tan Pact and Console fit in this category, but I think those are probably a pretty clear step below a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, maybe excluding fetch lands for Morgan.
I mean, I feel like it also it does kind of make it harder to put them on the list just because there's 2 of them. Like, yeah. Like, because I think they're like less powerful than the cards on this list. They're extremely centralizing, but they're not individually centralizing.
Right. Like, they're centralizing in context.
Yeah.
And very more heavily contextual than any of the stuff that we have on the centralizing card list right now. Where like Timna, Dockside, and Adnaz, if you assume the default of the CDH format are all like powerful cards on their own, like Tan Pact and Consult require both building around and like other stuff to actually like make them good. Yeah. I don't think I have anything else to say about centralizing cards here. I think it was a pretty good one.
I guess not specifically. I guess sort of the next the next topic, I feel like kind of fits in with most centralizing card. I considered combining them.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of what's like doing the most for a deck or an archetype. And I had two, but I've decided that only one of them is really worth talking about because I don't feel like getting laughed at for the other one. So I put Winota, right? Like, just that deck. That deck is a very strong deck. I don't put it in like the top echelon of the format. Many people do. And like without Winota, that deck I would say. Literally is like unplayable garbage.
Yep.
So like, and I don't think, like, I think even, you know, I think at a certain point in the past, I said that like the deck that does the most, or the commander that does the most for its deck is Yisan. I think that just like the generic green stuff, like creature toolboxy green stuff, is better than Boros stacks.
Yeah, 100%.
And like without a commander. And like certainly Winota is a hell of a lot better than Yisan as a deck.
Yeah.
So just the insane jump that Winota provides to that one deck is like an argument for being the best card in the format.
So this is the category for the it's the wins above replacement category, the war category.
Yeah, basically
4+, where it's just like what's the difference in a deck between the deck having this card and the deck having like the next best replacement for the card. And yeah, I think Winota definitely represents like probably the peak of that category in general. I think like another one is like I think Kinnan is decent in terms of like the power that it offers to the deck, and it like offers a very different axis of what the deck's doing.
I mean, just, like, I don't know. I feel like
mid-range.
I guess it depends on what
green blue mid-range has like just a much higher floor than like Boros in general. So it's like hard to argue for Kinnan over Winota, but I think it also like deserves a mention in the war category.
I mean, I don't know. I think that like depending on how exactly you class it, I think like a big mana / infinite mana blue green deck, like I think Thrasios Kaidel is still like a deck that would play in many ways very similarly to Kinnan and be like I honestly think that deck is like it would be okay.
Fine.
It wouldn't be great.
Yeah.
I don't think Kinnan's great. But I think it would be just so much better than like the next best Boros stacks commander. Right. And I think Kinnan is probably, well, maybe Kinnan's about on par with Winota as a deck.
Yeah, I would say it's certainly like power level wise they're like pretty similar. I'd say objectively, like or sort of like in terms of not objectively ranking them, but in terms of like just like straight up power level on either end. I think they're like pretty close. Yeah, I don't know. There's probably like a couple of other that we could pull out of the ether here, but nothing's coming to me like off the top of my head. Anyway. Yeah. And then we have our last category here, which is I think something that people don't really talk about a huge amount. We've definitely had a few discussions with people about this, both like together with people and then like individually, I think. But I think it's always worth like bringing up, which is the win rate. Like the win rate increase, or you win rate with a card in like a certain set of different situations. So the ones that Morgan put down here are like when you draw a card, what's your win rate? When you actually like cast the card and put it on the stack, what's your win rate when you do that with a card? And then like what's your win rate when you actually like fully resolve the spell and it like leaves the stack? Because those are like very different criteria, and it like totally changes how you're evaluating a card as like a good card or the best card.
Yeah, I think it's sort of an interesting discussion. I've definitely done a lot of this analysis when I played semi-competitive Hearthstone, because like they had a data gathering program that had like millions of games, and so you could look at decks and really see like, oh, these are like the best cards in the deck because they have like a 60% drawn win rate.
Yeah.
And like I remember people would look at played win rate, and there were a bunch that were like finishers have insane played win rates.
Yeah.
Right? Like
because the game is already over by the time
because the game is
cast
it's like
yeah.
yes, the number of times you win the game when you cast Thassa's Oracle is very
yeah.
very high because you don't cast it if you're not like trying to win the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, looking at like the drawn win rate and the win rate in the opener was like very eye opening, and I think it's I think there's like sort of arguments for I think the weakest argument out of these categories is for arguing like the best card based on win rate when resolved.
Yeah, because it's just sort of like it's just goldfishing. Like, what's the?
Because like the highest there
win
would
rate of card
be like
yeah.
Probably Pure, or like maybe something like a little more out there like Tooth and Nail.
Yeah,
but like obviously these are not. I think like
yeah,
there's a sort of a I forget the term, but when your principle comes to like an obviously, I guess it's sort of a reductio ad absurdum, like that if you're saying Pure is the best card in the format, like you've gone wrong somewhere.
Yeah,
you've made a mistake.
I don't know where you went wrong, but we know that you took a bad path somewhere.
Yeah, I think cast is like a little more interesting because obviously it does still factor in, like, effectively the problem with resolved is that it doesn't factor in the interactability. I guess the problem with cast is that it doesn't factor in the cost.
Yeah. So like a very expensive good card would be
yeah, it's obviously going to like overvalue high priced finishers,
splashy
or like
effect,
solo finishers.
Yeah.
But I think it's like a more reasonable. I think it's a much more reasonable thing to be like looking at, just because at the very least I think there's a certain school of thought that like if you don't want your best cards to be enablers, you want them to be payoffs, because like that's just sort of how you think about it. Like you think the thing that's winning you the game is the good card, not like what got you there, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I sort of see as an
I understand
approach.
why, yeah.
Then maybe looking at cast would be like a little bit more where you'd want to be, because like when you're looking at drawn, obviously that's going to, like, cards are actually only good when you cast them. So if you look at drawn, like cheap cards are obviously going to dominate.
Yeah.
Because if a card's only good when you cast it and you don't cast it every time you draw it, then like that's a huge penalty to the win rate right there. So like it's going to overvalue the cheap cards, but cast is going to overvalue sort of the more expensive cards. There's not necessarily a good way to sort of solve that.
Yeah, you would probably want some form of like composite model on. I'd probably say like drawn and cast, to get like decent results there, or at least just like taking a look at both of those stats for cards if you're trying to evaluate this for yourself. I also threw another one in here, which is not usually as much looked at, and I wouldn't say is as useful as drawn or cast, but I think something to take into account is the win rate when tutored for, because this really weighs for like cards that you like didn't have in your opening hand, and like didn't necessarily or like didn't like naturally find, but you actively have like cards in your deck that are dedicated to finding other cards in your deck specifically. And if your win rate after you tutor a card is relatively high, then like that means that you're like it means that it's going to be a very situationally good card, which potentially means like best card in the format, or potentially just means that it's like a silver bullet that you just have in the deck, and if like the drawn percentage is really low and the tutored percentage is really high, it means that it's just like, oh, this is like a card that is like almost never good, but when it is, you really want access to it. But it's just like sort of another access to, you know, evaluating like how good you think a card is, especially because like if the like tutored, if your like win rate when tutored is very low, but you have high stats in other areas, it could also be interesting and mean like a lot of different things as well. I'm having trouble coming up with an example for that case, but I'm sure it exists.
Yeah, I don't have a good one off the top of my head, but certainly.
I guess just like Command Tower. very
I
high
feel
win
like
rate
if
when you
you're
have a
tutoring
Command Tower,
then
but
something's gone horribly wrong.
yeah, exactly. Very good drawn win rate, but a terrible tutored win rate. Anyway,
Containment Priest. Back when Flash was legal.
Correct. Yeah, so I mean that's the last sort of broad category that we have here. I think I actually got through most of the stuff that I got. I got my Timden fetches rants off, so that's pretty much satisfaction for me. Anything else that you want to
surpass the minimum requirements for an Into the North episode? Reed got
yeah, exactly.
Both Timna and fetches this time. Wow.
It's a great one.
I mean,
very happy.
I guess the only last thing to consider is, you know, have we successfully walked the line and managed to avoid bothering anyone by, you know, just approaching this from an abstract sense, or have we just pissed everyone off by not acknowledging that what they think is clearly the best card in the format is the best card in the format?
And then to add another axis to this, did we cross the line of making the decision-making process on this and like talking through all the decisions so abstract that it's completely useless, or is it at least grounded in reality to a point where it is useful?
Well, I mean, I feel like
it's the usefulness annoyance scale is what we'll call that one.
Honestly, I feel like this discussion is actually like useless, sort of by definition. Like I don't think of this as
that's
like
fair.
I think people think it matters, and like it actually doesn't at all in my mind. Like it's an interesting academic exercise, and like it's useful as a tool for like understanding how people think about things, and maybe how you think about things, and your, you know, biases. But like I don't actually think like coming to an answer is like not the point of asking this question.
Yeah, exactly. It's the decision making and everything leading up to that point. Cool. So that is the best card in the format. All of that, all that put together. You synthesize all of that, and that's the best card in the format.
I mean, it's Stormcrow, right?
Yeah, obviously. I'll throw I'll just call it Timna for now, just to make people angry and to leave a capstone on it.
I feel like we almost got away with it.
Almost. But yeah, so that's our main topic. And then I'll go through a couple of things that we're just not going to do because we don't have people / we don't have content. But I'll call them out anyway so that you guys know what's happening for other episodes. Don't have a gut check this episode, but we encourage you to participate in the gut check channel in Discord, because it's a great source of both engagement and just seeing what people actually, you know, if people agree with our opinions at all, because it's great to actually have some amount of just assurance that we're not living in the Matrix and we're not just having like all of our opinions catered to by the giant AI in the ceiling.
No, it's because we've successfully, you know, stifled. We've just pushed.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah.
So go tell us how much you agree with us in the gut
exactly.
channel.
And then we also are not doing a listener question this week, but if you want to submit listener questions, feel free. You can go to the Discord, and we have a listener questions submission channel for both the general public and for our patrons. Our patrons get priority for listener questions, so we'll always try to answer those ones first, or answer those ones as soon as possible, get those ones answered. But we're more than happy to answer any stuff that you want, you think would make an interesting answer on the podcast, or an interesting question for the podcast. But yeah, that about wraps it up for this episode. If y'all would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email at intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, for which the invite is in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work toward improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we have patreon.com/intothenorthpodcast, also in the description for this episode. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, and to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.
Have a good one.